Okay, so can you please tell me about yourself and your recent project in brief?
Yeah, hi. So I have around 3.4 years of experience working mainly on backend development, and mostly I use Spring Boot and microservices architecture in that. And I have been involved in both service-based and product-based applications where I have worked on developing a scalable and maintainable enterprise-level solutions. And in my recent project, like I was responsible for designing and developing RESTful APIs and implementing business logic in the service layer and also integrating with the databases using the Spring Data JPA. And I also worked on securing application using the Spring Security and handling the configurations for different environments. And along with backend, I also have some basic knowledge on front end. So in that, I have experience on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So that mostly I use to have it and collaborate better with the UI teams. And I also worked with relational databases and have had some the experience in writing efficient queries and managing data as well. So yeah, so this is what is all about myself and my project.
Okay, so what is the exact project? Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, sure. So, in my recent project, I worked on the microservices based e-commerce application, and basically the system was designed to handle different modules like user management, product catalog, order processing, and payment integration as a separate service. So, my primary responsibility was in the order and user service only, and I developed REST APIs for placing orders and tracking order status and managing user details. And I implemented business logic in the service layer and used Spring Data JPA for database interaction. And also we used a Spring Boot for building microservices and integrated them using the RESTful APIs. And for security, I worked with the Spring Security and JWT based authentication. So we use this to ensure like all secure communications between the services. And like I was also involved in handling inter-service communication and basic error handling and improving the performance by optimizing the database queries. So yeah, so this is what is about my project and the technologies I have used in that.
Okay, so what Spring Boot version you have used?
Yeah, I have used I think 2.7 I think.
Okay. Okay, so in Spring Security, can you tell me what you have used and how do you implement it in step by step? Can you tell me?
Yeah, sure. I have used Spring Security with JWT, so JSON Web Token basically. So that I have used for authentication and authorization. So I have implemented like stateless authentication with JWT and also like role-based authorization, like based on admin, like what all URLs should be allowed to access by admin and what all URLs should be allowed for the user. So those kind of things. So for that, actually, first of all, we add dependencies. So in like pom.xml, if you're using Maven, so we can use Spring Security dependency, and we can add JWT libraries using that, and then we can configure the Spring Security. So we can create a security configuration class, and we can disable the CSRF since we are using the REST APIs. So we disable that, and we configured in points like public APIs like auth and then the star and secured APIs for remaining all, and also for user authentication flow, we have created a login API to authenticate, and user sends the username and password and used authentication manager to authenticate it, and then generate JWT token. So after successful authentication, we generate JWT token. So this token basically contains the username, roles, and expiry time. All these details will be there inside that token, and after that we create JWT filter. So based on that, all the requests are getting filtered. So the token is validated in that point of time, and set the authentication in security context. And then we have loaded the user from the database. Once after that, so user details are loaded, and we return the user with roles and permission. And we used encrypt encoder for password encoding, and we store the encrypted password in database. And then for authorization, we have used like role-based authorization, and we used use annotation like at the rate of pre-authorize and at the rate of secure. So these annotations we have used, and restricted APIs based on the roles. Yeah, so this is what all happens behind the scenes. So like in very short, like user hits the login API and gets the JWT token and sends the token in header for every request, and then it filters the and validated the token. We do that, and if it is valid, then only request is allowed, and if it is invalid, then 401 unauthorized request we can send back to the user. So that is what is the overall flow. Yeah.
Okay, so where do you store JWT on client side?
Yeah, so in our application, we prefer the storage availability in HTTP only, secure cookies. So because like they provide better security compared to other options. So since HTTP only cookies cannot be accessed through JavaScript, and they help protect the token from the XSS attacks. So we also configured additional flags like secure to ensure the cookies is only sent over the HTTPS, and same site to reduce the risk of CSRF attack. So along with options like local storage or session storage are easier to use. So they are more vulnerable because the token can be accessed by JavaScript and potentially stolen also. So that is why we try to avoid that, and therefore for production grade applications, especially where the security is critical, storing JWT in HTTP only cookies is like considered as the best practice. So we are storing there. Yeah.
Okay, so when do we send refresh token and at what point basically this concept is used?
Yeah, so basically we use the refresh token when the access token expires. So at the time of login, we usually generate two tokens. So one is short-lived access token, and another one is the long-lived refresh token. So when the client makes an API call and the access token has expired, then the server responds with the 401 unauthorized. So at that point, the client uses the refresh token to call a refresh API, and the server validates the refresh token and issues a new access token without requiring the user to log in again. Okay, so in real scenarios, this process is mostly handled in the background by the front end, so the user does not even notice it. So this approach basically helps us to maintain a good balance between the security and the user experience. So yeah, so since the access token is like short-lived, while the refresh token is long-lived, and it allows the seamless re-authentication. So yeah, so that is how this is used.
Okay, and what if refresh token also expired?
Yeah, so if the refresh token is also expired, then we cannot generate a new access token anymore. So in that case, the user has to log in again. So basically, when the client calls the refresh API and refresh token is invalid or expire, then server will again return 401 unauthorized, or sometimes we can also receive 403. So after that, we usually clear any store tokens on the client side and redirect the user to the like login page again. Okay, so in some implementations we also maintain refresh token in the database or use token rotation. So if a refresh token is used reused or re expired, then we can invalidate the session completely for security reasons. So yeah, so overall, like once both tokens expired, then the only option is to re-authenticate the user. So yeah.
Okay, so what is the difference between 401 and 403?
Yeah, so the main difference is around like authentication and authorization. So that is the main difference. So 401 is unauthorized and 403 is forbidden. So unauthorized means the user is not authenticated. So either the token is missing, invalid, or expired. So basically the server is saying that my server does not know the person who is trying to log in. So like that person has to re-log in and provide the valid credentials. And 403 forbidden means the user is authenticated but not authorized. Okay, so that is the meaning of this. So if the user is trying to access the resource, so in that case the user is like the server I mean identify the user, but the proper role is not there with the user. So here the server like knows that. So yeah, so that's the main difference between these two.
Okay, so what is the purpose of at the rate of auto-wired?
Yeah, at the rate of AutoWAD, that is one annotation. So that is used for dependency injection is the Spring. So that means that Spring automatically provides the required object instead of us creating it manually using new. So it basically helps in reducing the tight coupling between the classes and makes the code more maintainable. Yeah, so by using at the rate of AutoWAD, Spring looks for a matching bean in the container and injects it into the acquired class. So yeah, so it can be used on the field constructor or setter methods also. So we have these three types of way using which we can do the like injection. But in real projects, like constructor injection is like more preferred. So yeah, so that is what is the difference between these three, and that is what is the auto add. Yeah.
Okay, so why constructor injection is more preferred? Can you explain?
Yeah, constructor injection is generally preferred because it makes the dependencies mandatory and explicit. So when we define dependencies in the constructor, then the object cannot be created unless all required dependencies are provided. So that basically avoids null related issues. Okay. So it also improves the immutability because we can mark the dependencies as final, and also like once the object is created, they cannot be changed. So this makes the class more stable and predictable. And another one reason I can say is like the better testability. Okay. So with constructor injection, we can easily pass mock objects while the writing unit test without relying on the Spring container. So yeah, so these are the reasons I think why the constructor injection is more preferred.
Okay, so how does Spring IOC container work? Can you explain?
Yeah, Spring IOC container is responsible for creating, managing, and injecting object beans in the application. So instead of us like manually creating objects using new, the container takes control and handles the entire life cycle of bean. So it basically reads the configuration like either through annotation or Java config or XML. So it basically identifies the beans and creates them, and then injects the required dependencies wherever needed. So this is based on the principle of inversion control, where control is shifted from the developer to the framework. So yeah, so this mostly like commonly used implementation in the application context. So that not only creates and manages beans, but also provides the additional features like we have AOP support, and then event handling and internationalization. So all these things are the part of application context is there. However, in the bean factory has like only the basic things are there, like basic support is only there. So yeah, so that is why like IOC container like it helps in achieving the loose coupling and better maintainability. So yeah, so that is why we are using IOC container only. So that is how IOC container works.
Okay, so what do you mean by loose coupling? Can you tell me?
Yeah, loose coupling basically means that the classes are not tightly dependent on each other's implementation, but rather like dependent on the abstraction like interfaces. So this basically makes the system more flexible because we can change one implementation without affecting other parts of the application. So for example, instead of directly creating an object using new, we rely on Spring to inject the dependency. So if the implementation changes, so we do not need to modify the dependent class. So it also improves maintainability and testability because we can easily replace real implementations with the mock objects during the testing. So overall, like loose coupling basically helps in building a scalable and clean architecture where like components are independent and easier to manage. So yeah.
Okay, so suppose if two beans have primary annotation, okay, then what will happen? Can you tell me?
Yeah, if two bins are marked with at that of primary, then Spring will not be able to decide like which bin should be injected. So when there is a dependency of that type, so in such cases it will throw a like no unique bean definition exception because there is a ambiguity. Okay, so basically add that a primary is used to give preferences to one bean when multiple candidates are available. But if more than one bean is similar or like more than one bean is marked as primary, then that purpose is basically defeated and Spring gets confused. Okay, so to resolve this, we can use we have another annotation called add to qualifier to explicitly specify like which bean should be injected or ensure that only one bean is marked as like at the rate of primary. So either of these two we can do. So yeah, so that is how we can do. Yeah.
Okay. So do you know what is circular dependency and how can you resolve it?
Yeah, so circular dependency basically occurs when two or more beans depend on each other. So, for example, class A depends on class B, and again, let's say class B depends on class A. So, because of this, Spring is not able to decide like which bean to create first, and it can lead to application startup failure. So, yeah, so this usually happens like in the tightly coupled kind of design, and especially when we use constructor injection on both sides, since both beans are waiting for each other at the time of initialization. So yeah, so to resolve this, we can use like some approaches like one common a way is to switch to setter injection. So there Spring can first create the beans and then inject dependencies later. And apart from that, another approach is like we can use at the rate of lazy keyword like annotation. So that basically delays the initialization of one of the bean until it is actually needs. Yeah, so also we can refactor the design to break the circular dependency. So yeah, so these are the approaches we can take and to fix this circular dependency. So yeah.
Okay, what are the different bean scopes are there? Can you tell me?
Yeah, there are five altogether. So I think the first one is singleton, and then prototype, then request, then session, then global session. So yeah, so these are the different type of uh, beans scopes are there.
So which one is default in this?
Yeah, singleton is default. Yeah.
And what is prototype?
Yeah, so prototype basically means like a new instance of the bean is created every time it is requested from the container. So that is the prototype. And in case of singleton, basically like only one instance of the bean is created per Spring IOC container, and the same instance is shared everywhere. So that's the difference between these two. Yeah.
Okay, so what is the difference between Spring Bean and Java object?
Spring Bean is an object that is created, managed, and controlled by the Spring IOC container. Okay, and whereas the Java object is like created manually using the new keyword, and it is fully managed by the developer. So that's the main difference. So basically, in case of a Spring Bean, the container handles a dependency injection, lifecycle management, and configuration. So we don't need to worry about like wiring dependencies manually, and it also supports features like AOP, transactions, and scope management. And on the other hand, like normal Java objects are like kind of tightly coupled. So since we directly create and manage them, and we have to handle all dependencies and lifecycle ourselves. So yeah, so that's the difference between these two.
Okay, so what are Spring profiles?
Yeah, Spring Profiles basically is used to manage the environment specific configuration like dev, test, and production. So it allows us to define different configurations for different environments and activate only the required one at runtime. So for example, we can have different database configurations for dev and production, and based on the active profile, Spring will load the corresponding configuration. So this basically helps in avoiding manual changes in the code while moving between the environment. So yeah, so we can define profiles using like application profile dot properties or YAML file. So that we can give. So instead of profile, we can just give like application dot dev properties, application dot like test properties. So all that we can give. So yeah, so basically overall it makes the application more flexible, clean, and like easier to manage across the different environments. So yeah.
Okay, so coming to microservices, can you tell me what challenges have you faced in microservices?
Yeah, one of the main challenges is handling inter-service communication and debugging issues across the multiple services. So that I feel is the most challenging one, and data consistency is also difficult because each services has its own database. So monitoring and logging can become like also complex in distributed system. So yeah, so we handle these challenges by using like proper logging and centralized monitoring and implementing like a retry mechanism and fallback strategies. So we have to follow all these strategies in order to overcome the main challenges of the microservices. So yeah, so these are challenges we have faced.
Okay, so in very short, can you tell me how do microservices communicate with each other?
Yeah, microservices can communicate either synchronously using the REST API or asynchronously using the messaging system like Kafka or RabbitMQ. So in most cases, like REST is used for simple communication, while messaging is preferred for event-driven architecture and better decoupling. So basically, the when we have to use which one, that totally depends on the use case and the performance requirements. Like suppose if any communication is there in which the sender is sending the message and receiver can receive anytime, like after that, whenever um, suppose it is in queued, so anytime it can receive, and that does not impact the performance of the application. In that case, we can easily go with the this Kafka, RabbitMQ, and all. So yeah, so we can do asynchronous in that time. Otherwise, if we need the immediate response, then we have to use synchronous communication only. So yeah.
Okay, so what is API gateway and why is it used?
Yeah, API gateway basically acts as a simple entry point for all client requests. So, like instead of calling multiple microservices directly, the client communicates with the API gateway, which then routes the request to the appropriate services. So, yeah, so it also handles concern like authentication, logging, rate limiting, and request routing. So that makes the system more secure and manageable. So yeah, so that's the API gateway. Yeah.
Okay, and what is service discovery?
Yeah, service discovery is the mechanism that allows microservices to find and communicate with each other dynamically without hard coding URLs. So yeah, so a service registers itself with discovery server, and other services can look it up whenever needed. So yeah, so this is basically useful in dynamic environments where services scale up and down frequently. So yeah, so that's what is the service discovery. Yeah.
And what is circuit breaker pattern?
Yeah, circuit breaker is used to prevent like repeated calls to a failing service. So if a service is down or responding very slowly, then the circuit breaker opens and stops the further calls to the services for some time. So instead, it can return a fallback response, and this helps in avoiding the system overload and improves the resilience. So basically, we write a fallback method, and we can define there the definition like what should happen if suppose any kind of hiccups come while communicating between the services. So what should happen? So that fall in that fallback method we can write it. So and accordingly action can be taken. So yeah.
Okay, so what do you understand by oops in Java?
Oops, like yeah, object-oriented programming. So that is a definition of it. So that is a basically programming language based on the objects and classes. So it focuses on concepts like encapsulation, inheritance, polymorphism, and abstraction. So all these together makes the OOPS concept, and these concept basically helps in the organizing code into reusable and maintainable structure, and it also improves the scalability and reduces the code duplication. So yeah, so that's what is the oops concept. Yeah.
Okay, So what is polymorphism?
Yeah, so polymorphism basically allows methods to behave differently based on context. So it can be achieved through the method overloading. So basically that is compile time, and method overloading and method overriding, that is happens at the runtime. So it basically improves the flexibility and readability, and it allows the same interface to be used for different implementations. So that's what is the polymorphism.
Okay, so what is the difference between interface and abstract class?
Yeah, so an interface basically contains only abstract methods. So and basically before Java, it only used to contain only abstract methods, while an abstract classes can have both abstract and concrete methods. So interfaces supports multiple inheritance, whereas the abstract class do not. So that's the main difference. And interface are used for contracts, while abstract classes are used for partial implementation. So that's the difference between these two.
Okay, so what is final keyword?
A final can be used with variables, methods, and classes. So final variables cannot be changed. So that's the main thing. And final method cannot be overridden. And final class cannot be also inherited. So that's the main use of final keyword. And it is mainly used for immutability and security. So like for example, string class we have that is final. So yeah, so that is what is the final keyword. Yeah.
Okay, and what is equals and hash code?
Yeah, equals basically compares object content, while hash code returns a hash value for the object. So both are used in collections like hash map. So if equals is overridden, then hash code must also be overridden. So that's the main thing, and this also ensures the like proper working of hash based collections. So that's the difference between these two. Yeah.
And what is the difference between array list and linked list?
Yeah, so array list uses a dynamic array, while a linked list uses a double linked list. So that is the internally working of these two. So array list is also faster for the random access, and linked list is better for insert and delete. Okay, and memory usage is also higher in linked list. So yeah, so that's the basically the main choice depends on the use case. Like our main preference is like insert, delete, or like random access. So yeah, based on that we can use it. Yeah.
And what is concurrent hash map?
Yeah, concurrent hash map is a thread safe version of hash map, and it allows concurrent read write operations without locking the entire map. So yeah, so it also improves the performance in multi-thread environment. So it uses the segment level locking. So yeah, so that's what is the concurrent hash map. Yeah.
So does this concurrent hash map allows null keys and values?
Concurrent hash map, no. Concurrent hash map does not allow null keys or null values. So this is mainly to avoid ambiguity during the concurrent operations. So for example, if we have get method, so that returns null, then in that case we won't be able to tell whether the key is absent or the value is actually null. So to maintain the clarity and avoid any kind of race conditions, so null are not allowed in this case. Yeah.
Okay, so what is fail fast and fail safe? Can you tell me?
Yeah, so fail fast and fail safe are the like behavior of iterators in collections when the underlying collection is modified during iteration. So fail fast iterators immediately throw a concurrent modification exception if they detect any structure modification like any add or remove is there. And so for example we have array list and hash map and all. So on the other hand, like fail safe iterators do not throw exception, instead they work on a snapshot or a copy of the collection. So even if the original collection is modified, then the iteration continues safely. Okay, so in this case the examples we have like concurrent hash map, copy on write array list. So all these are like the fail safe operations, okay, because they create the copy of it. Okay, so yeah, so that's the difference between these two.